Hello, everybody. Welcome and good evening. I'm Rabbi Tamara Cohen, and I'm delighted that you have chosen to join us tonight. Please continue to share where you're calling in from in the chat. And if you want, you can add your favorite Hanukkah treat that you're looking forward to having soon. And as you just saw, I am a Chief Program Officer of Moving Traditions and also a parent with my partner, Gwen, of a 16-and-a-half-year-old teenage boy. And it's my pleasure to welcome you if you've been here before on a previous Raising Up Teens Moving Traditions webinar, to welcome you back. And if it's your first time, really to welcome you into these webinars, which we have begun during the pandemic and are continuing because in our work to support the thriving of teens, we really want to support you, parents, guardians, family members. And the way we're thinking about that is really supporting the entire ecosystem of those who are caring for and raising up teens. We know it's not easy work, and we know that sometimes we parents don't always feel like we're still important influencers in our teens' lives, but we are, even if they seem to look at us a little bit less than those on TikTok. What we're saying is getting in there somehow. So we're focusing tonight on parenting for well-being. And just a word about that word, well-being. We're using it because we want to convey that we're thinking about the whole teen, and we always have since the beginning of Moving Traditions about 15 years ago. Now we use the word shlemut in Hebrew to talk about well-being, which also means wholeness, and is related to the word shalom, for peace. And it's a way of talking about how we really want teens to feel supported in their whole selves. And we're thinking about teens on all spectrums of whether they're doing really well right now or not. And we're thinking about their spiritual lives, their emotional lives, their social health. And we'll get a lot more into that soon. There are two other words we also use when we're thinking about the outcomes we are working towards for teens. And for teens thrivings, and those are chesed, which we translate as caring connections. And we're thinking about helping teens build healthy relationships, caring connections with other teens, friendships when they're ready, other kinds of relationships, relationships with adults, and relationships with the Jewish community, and also how to support them in believing that they really can make a difference in our society and in our world, which clearly could use their energy and passion for healing and justice. So that's a little bit more about us. Tonight, I am so looking forward to being in conversation with Dr. Betsy Stone. I've been at Moving Traditions for 9 years, and I think that means 9 years of getting to gain wisdom from listening to you, Betsy. And it's just a pleasure to now be in conversation with you to gain some more wisdom about how to think about this crazy sacred job of
It is a
parenting
crazy
and raising
sacred
teens.
job.
Yeah.
And I think those of us who are enamored of teens, the world looks at us as crazy as well.
Yeah, teens do get a hard rap.
They do. They do. Teens and young adults both get a hard rap. And I'm far from convinced that it is either true or that it is helpful to either parents or kids that they get.
Yeah. I know when I started here, I had to kind of confront some of my own residual issues with how hard it was to be a teen myself. And that was a piece of what helped me do this work and also be ready to parent.
You know, it's an interesting, this is tangential, but bear with me. It's interesting to me. We spend a lot of time when our kids are toddlers learning about toddlers. And we don't expect ourselves to be experts at what toddlers are doing or what they're like. Um, we do think that we are experts at teens just because we were teens and we remember being teens.
Mm.
And I find that very often when I'm talking about normal, healthy teen development, that people say, oh, yeah, I know all of that because I remember when I was 15. When you were 15 and when your kids are 15 are utterly different beasts. We are living in a different world, whether it is technology or the pandemic or social media. The world of our adolescence is so different than the world that I grew up in, that you grew up in. And so I think it's a terrible
Mm.
disservice to our kids to assume I know what I need to know.
So I know you've done a lot of thinking about this in terms of the ways that we can go wrong in assuming we fully understand or that the rules that we may have grown up with will still work today. Can you give some more examples of that?
Well, the most obvious example to me right now is the idea that we can reset to this phrase, which makes me crazy these days, which is back to normal. But that's really not about the difference between their childhoods and ours. The obvious, and so we'll come back to that, I hope.
Yes.
The obvious place that we really see this is around technology. That we tend to say to our children, we tend to treat our children's relationship with technology and social media as though it is non-addictive in design. It's crystal clear to me that the people who are creating this technology are creating it in ways which raise our addiction response. And adolescents are more susceptible to addiction than adults, just because of how their brains are developing. So we say to our kids, put your phone down. And we don't actually teach them how to do it. It's not a physical act, but it's separating from that thing which has been seducing me and seducing me and seducing me for long periods of time. When you think about it, as nothing more serious than those three little dots when you're texting with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
those three little dots, the message of them is stay here, don't go away. And when your phone vibrates, the message of that is stay here, don't go away. There's lots of good research that says that we get phantom buzzes. That I feel my phone vibrate when it's not vibrating because I'm just so sensitized, that's called addiction, to the stimulus. One of the things I see a lot around, particularly technology, is that parents who won't put their phones away are telling kids to put their phones away.
Yeah, I can't say I'm not guilty.
Um,
But how does knowing that it's been programmed to make us addicted and that they are extra prone to it help me as a parent? It just makes me feel all the more like I have no control
so I
and
think,
nervous.
yeah, I think we have to actually train ourselves and train our families to put those things down. We know that people who sleep with a phone in their bedroom sleep less deeply and have less restful sleep than people who don't sleep with a phone in their bedroom. So what do? We say to them, for the duration of this meal, everybody's phone is away. And then we put our phones away and we don't have our watches vibrating. That's another way in which the technology is following us around. And we allow for that to be challenging for us and for them. We actually talk about it. So, I have to put my phone down now, and I'm going to have a response to that. We know that when kids go to sleepaway camp, and most sleepaway camps now won't permit kids to have phones,
Hmm.
campers to have phones, although staff
Yeah,
still has
it is
phones.
why I love it.
Yeah, that there's a short period, but there's a period that looks like withdrawal. And if we don't learn the skills of saying, I'm not going to do this now, then I'm going to not be able to put those things away. Phones are only one example.
Yeah, tell us
Um,
some others.
so another example that I think is really a fascinating one, I think is a direct result of No Child Left Behind, is I think we have 2 or 3 generations of kids who went through the school system and never learned critical thinking. They didn't learn how to evaluate information because the point of No Child Left Behind was to test teachers. It was not to teach children. And they were pretty explicit about that the goal was to make sure that we had quality teachers. So what we decided was that we would only teach things that were testable on a paper and pencil test. Critical thinking is very difficult to test. But what is critical thinking? It is when I read or look at a political ad, I say to myself, this person is trying to make me think X, and that's why I'm seeing the result that I'm seeing. That's why they're presenting this information the way they are. And when we don't have critical thinking, boomers were taught critical thinking. Most Gen Xers were taught critical thinking. Millennials were not taught critical thinking, and Gen Zs are not being taught critical thinking.
It makes me feel good about our programs because
Well,
the media literacy is
yes.
such a key way that we try to help teens be aware of gender messages.
Yep,
And so that does really teach critical thinking
it does.
as part of, decoding what messages are coming at you from pop
Exactly,
culture and
exactly.
media, etc.
And one of the fascinating parts of that, actually, Rabbi, is that I think Jewish education writ large is about critical thinking. Now, when you look at like a fourth graders want to get the answer right. They're kind of hardwired to want to please and get the answer right. 7th, 8th, 10th graders want to struggle with questions. And so if we find ways to keep our kids engaged at the age at which struggling with questions is natural, we're actually able to teach critical thinking through Jewish spaces. I don't think most of our kids get very many opportunities to learn critical thinking.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And just a piece that we also really bring to that is matching the critical thinking skills with also the awareness of one's emotional response to things. Because even when we get to the age of enjoying the questions and the debate, if we are cut off, if young people are cut off from, well, how does it actually feel? Then we know that can be especially difficult in intimate situations where thinking it isn't enough. I also need to know how I'm feeling in this.
Right, right. What's fascinating to me about what you're raising right now is there is old research. So does it apply to Gen Zs? I don't know. I haven't seen newer research in this arena, but there's old research that says that typically when women and children talk about how they feel, that we get one of two responses. The first is that we're told that we don't feel what we said we feel, that what you feel is wrong. And the second, which can come out in lots of ways, that you're so sensitive, or that doesn't make any sense to me. It has a lot to do with the tone of voice. The other thing that women and children are told is what to do about your feelings, which is also a message that your feelings are wrong. So if you and I are standing at the line for a roller coaster and I say to you, I'm scared, you either say to me, there's nothing to be scared of. Well, I'm already scared. That horse is out of the
right.
Or you say, this is what you should do about your fear, neither of which respects my fear. It's
Yeah.
both of
Yeah.
which say, I know better than you about what you're afraid of. And that's, I think that's pretty typical responses for women and children. Men don't get those responses as often, partly because men don't talk about their feelings as often. Um, as
I think in our Chevet work, we have uncovered, or I've learned from a lot of Shepherd group leaders, that there are also messages about don't feel afraid or don't go with your, just keep going for it.
Right.
And then when we think about this in terms of the context of sexuality and consent, like how important it is to respect each other's feelings and thoughts, really comes through.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
so another thing that you and I have talked about, and that I feel like is really important for all of us parents to hear, is about connecting with one another. I think about what you said about early childhood. Not only did I read a lot of books, but I was encouraged to join this group, this play date group, or this play date group, and there's a different feeling of talking with other parents about our about our teens, about our decisions, about our questions, about boundaries with them. It feels riskier
It
somehow,
does. It does.
um, not to
So,
step on each other's toes. What can you say about that and why it matters?
so let's start with historically, there are naturally occurring groups of parents. You drop your kid at preschool and you walk out with another parent. And whether you like them or not, they witness your kid having a meltdown when you leave. They witness your kid coming to school in their slippers. They witness all sorts of things that we say, oh, I tried to control that, but it didn't work. And so we have these, what I would call naturally occurring groups of parents.
Hmm.
Um, those were eradicated to a large degree in the pandemic for small kids. And one of the things we're seeing coming out of that, now I'm talking about little kids,
Mhm.
is little kids who are more independent than they would have been. Let me go off on a tangent right here for a second. It's the would have beens. Um, our children, we keep talking about our children getting back to normal. We talk
Mhm.
about things like learning loss. Fourth graders are not reading at a fourth grade level. And college kids don't have study skills and blah, blah, blah. That some of which is completely related to the pandemic. I think when we focus on our children's deficits rather than their assets, that what we do is we say your deficits matter more than your assets. I would much rather notice and focus on the strengths that our kids bring to the table, the ways in which they have learned and grown. There's research in the psychological field on something called post-traumatic growth, which
Mhm.
looks at the ways in which nobody ever picks trauma. Nobody ever picks trauma. But the ways in which I come through trauma changed for the positive rather than only changed for the negative. And I think we are phenomenally deficit focused about our kids right now. Um, I I look at my fourth grade granddaughter and no, she's not reading at a fourth grade level. However, she is sensitive to other people's fears in a way that I
Mm.
think she might not be. And so I want us to see our lives in balance, not just simply in terms of the deficits. That was my tangent. Now I'm going to
Yes,
come
it's a good
back to
one, and it's so hard to actually do.
yes, 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 yes. But I want to come back to this question of parents. Um, About 6 or 8 weeks ago, I found myself thinking a lot about um, parental groups. And kind of, are there naturally occurring groups for the parents of middle schoolers and high schoolers and college kids? And I think that one of the messages that parents have in the United States have historically gotten about their children is back away. Just
Mhm.
let them back away and have them be successful at the same time. These often do not go hand in hand. Um, the it is important for our kids to develop struggle muscles, for our kids to work out things that are within their ability. But I think it is also really important for parents to have natural communities of parents. So maybe that was a PTA when your kid was in elementary school. For some people that works, for others of us, it does not work. But the idea that I have people who are in the same stage of life vis-a-vis parenting, or and parenting and working, and parenting and staying at home, and all of the kinds of variables around parenting. It was interesting to me when I started thinking about parenting issues. I found myself trying to figure out where in the Jewish community parents live, and the answer was nowhere.
Hmm.
There's lots of programming for teens. There's some programming for kids and parents. There's lots of programming for toddler parents. PJ Library does lots of stuff for parents. But the parents of adolescents and young adults who are really dealing with life and death issues a lot of the time. I used to say that the difference between toddlers and adolescents in terms of brain function is that adolescents can make and take life, but they are both having tantrums and impulsive.
Yes.
So what are we offering to parents to support them, to help them help their children, and to help them allow their kids to struggle, and develop skills at solving problems?
Yeah. So I have two thoughts. One is, and this is why we've been adding more sessions finally for parents, not just for teens, to connect with one another. And the other is, I know sometimes it takes a crisis for us parents to actually talk about more than, okay, is a sleepover at your house or my house? And getting there to like sitting around in a friend's backyard with other parents of my son's friends, even if we had different ideas about what boundaries are okay, has been so helpful. But it did take, in our case, it took like worry. And I think it would have been even better if we did it earlier,
Yes.
before that. And we sort of are all connected. I would say one place parents are meeting each other is, like, in my life anyway, was around Bar Mitzvah, going to one, helping carpool, those kinds of things. But then we stopped needing to do that as much. But that could be an opportunity to really, stay connected after that, and support
Right.
each other.
And to have people who can both support you and challenge you, because actually that's what good friends do, is they support you and they challenge you.
Yeah.
The other piece of parenting that I want to raise up for us, because to me it's incredibly important, is kind of trying to figure out what the goals are. What are your goals in parenting? And what most parents say, and they say it to their kids, is, I just want them to be happy. I really hate that. I don't use the word very, very often. And the thing I really don't like about it is that I think it's an unreasonable goal. I'm not happy all the time.
It was very, very illuminating to me when I first heard you say this. So
Yeah.
say it
And
again. That's not the goal, huh?
That's not the
happiness.
goal. And I think the part of the problem is, if I say to my child, all I want is for you to be happy, then when they have a crappy day, they have let me down.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to, I want them to come to me when they have a crappy day, because I'm a resource, not because I'm going to fix it, because lots of things I can't fix. But what is the goal of parenting? Somebody, I am stuff, put in the chat, I want them to live meaningful lives, contribute to society,
Yeah,
and function
beautiful.
well. And I want you to take that a step farther. And I want you to think about how do you operationalize that in the moment by moment service that is often parenting. My I had a goal for myself that was that I wanted to like them when they were 30, which meant when they were 15 and calling me a bitch or doing things that I thought were awful, I didn't have to like them.
Mm.
I had to parent them. And if I kept thinking about what does a 30-year-old look like, it meant that they didn't have Twizzlers for dinner, although that is what I would have for dinner if you just wanted me to be happy, would be Twizzlers, red Twizzlers. And so the idea that when we tell our kids all I want is for you to be happy, I think what we're actually telling them is I have a goal for you and it is impossible.
Mm.
It's like saying to me, I want you to be 6'2". I'm almost 5'3". I can't be 6'2", and I can't be
Yeah,
happy all the time. And and I wouldn't actually want to be happy all the time, because if I were happy all the time, I would not be living a life that involved critical thinking.
exactly. Exactly. Goes right back to that. That there's something else that you said to me earlier about weak ties that really stuck with me. And I was thinking about how I saw recently a parent when my son went to a pickup ultimate game on Shabbat, a parent that I haven't seen in a while, in part because of the pandemic, and just said to me, like, oh, he's growing up to be such a mensch. And that there was something like, when someone who hasn't seen me in a while says something so just positive and strength based about my kid, how do I take that in?
Well, so
Um,
don't,
yeah.
my guess is if you're anything like me, you said, oh, you say something like, well, not all the time. Or something that diminishes the compliment, although the compliment wasn't given as a request. I mean, I assume you didn't say to this other parent, is my kid a mensch? So wouldn't it be nice if we could both take in those compliments and model taking in those compliments? Yes, he's a love. He's a real love. Wouldn't that be a lovely thing to be able to do? The the other part of that is that this interesting research on weak ties tells us that one of the really important things that happens for us is that we have relationships with people where the relationships don't matter. And the example I use for this, because it makes so much sense to me, it may not work for you, is when I walk into Dunkin' Donuts near me, they say to me, "Oh, large black, half calf, half decaf," and I feel seen and known. Now, they don't know me. They don't know what I do for a living. I don't know where they live. They don't know where I live. I don't know anything meaningful about them. But there's this concept in psychology that is called weak ties, WEAK, that are these connections that make us feel our own humanity in
Mm.
powerful ways. Our kids haven't had weak ties for years, and weak ties are important. And so that's one of the arenas that I think we ought to be thinking about. I think we ought to be thinking about how to help our kids regrow some of the minor social skills. Whether they are holding the door for somebody, and I'm not talking about boys holding the door for women. I'm talking about just
Appreciate that.
stepping outside of my own need.
Hmm.
Um, I think that these are spaces in which our kids can begin to learn their own values. So I want to talk about one more thing before I think
Great,
we're
great.
about to
Yep,
go to a video.
yep.
Okay. One of the things that's really interesting about that I think is an essential part of understanding adolescence in particular, but it's true of all of us, is that identity and character are really different.
Hmm.
My identity is much more fluid. My identity, how I behave on a Zoom is different than how I behave if I'm walking with a friend, is different than how I behave if I've had too much to drink at a New Year's Eve party. I don't go to New Year's Eve parties. Um, my behavior, my identity, the way I see myself and present myself is driven by circumstance. And that's equally true with our kids. So the mensch that you see and that this other parent saw is not the same person that your kids' friends see. That's okay. Identity is fluid. Character doesn't seem to be very fluid over our lifespan. And so there is a real deep connection between character strengths like generosity or appreciation of beauty or orderliness that seem to be relatively fixed over our lifespan and seem to be connected, deeply connected to our values. One of the things that I think our kids need us to help them do and to create space for them to do is to begin to identify, what am I good at and what do I care about? Sometimes that's influenced by what's going on in the world. I mean, the March for Our Lives kids happened because of the Parkland shooting. But sometimes it's just as I begin to know myself, I know what I value more. And our values are incredibly important for us to hold on to as really kind of core aspects of who we are and who we want to be.
I know we're moving on to something, but I have to ask a question about when you say identity is fluid, because thinking from an LGBTQ perspective, I feel challenged hearing identity is more fluid and character is more fixed, because identity, I have a lot invested in identity being a piece of my values. So I'm wondering if you're using identity in the same way as maybe
No, I think that's
some kids today are using identity, and that as those of us who grew up with we're defining ourselves around whether that's Jewish identity or queer identity was a really core part of values in a certain way.
So my guess is, and I'm putting words in your mouth, feel free to reject them.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is that as you knew yourself better and better, that those pieces that you might have called identity actually became character and values.
Mm.
That as I struggle with, am I going to be kind to this person who I think is a jerk? What I'm actually doing is that's behavior, and behavior is not necessarily values based. I begin to learn things about kind of what are my core values and character strengths. And as I learn myself, I don't think those things change dramatically. I think they just become clearer to us.
Yeah, very interesting. And just I think also interesting in terms of how we listen to the language of teens,
Right.
And hold the wisdom of what you're saying, and also honor the language that they're using.
And one of the ways we're seeing teens play with identity is the sheer number of teens who say, this is my given name by my parents, but this is the name I want to be called.
Yeah.
Which is not something that boomers ever thought about. And Gen Z
or my pronouns.
Right, or pronouns. But even if I said to you, my name, yes, you've called me Betsy my whole life, but my name is no longer Betsy. My name is Curtin. Simply renaming myself is a statement of identity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Alicia is up there.
Yeah. So I think we're gonna turn to learn some more from actual teens now. Yes, Alicia?
Hello, everyone. I'm Alicia Pedowitz. I'm the Director of Teen Education here at Moving Traditions. I as a parent of two teens. I am so enjoying this conversation. So thank you both. And I feel like what you were just talking about is a great segue into the next part of this conversation. We actually invited teams from some of our different programs to respond to a few questions, which I'm going to put in the chat so you can see them as we watch the videos. But what do you wish parents understood about being a teen today? What's one piece of advice you'd like to give parents and adults about supporting teens today? And what's one thing that your parent or group leader or mentor in the program that you're in has done to support you in the face of challenges that you'd like other adults to use as a model? So we felt like this was a great opportunity to give teens a chance to reflect on some of the very things you both are talking about what it means to parent our teens through challenges toward well-being.
A piece of advice I'd give to a parent or adult about supporting teens today is probably to, if they are saying something to you, to actually listen to what they're saying and not just be like, oh, I'll get to that later or something, because a lot of times it can be very bad and harmful for that to be something that is not a priority. And something an adult has done for me that's been helpful, is listening, listening to what I have to say, and then like taking that into account while they are forming and like changing their opinions kind of about something. So this can vary, but like an example has been when I've wanted to go to a concert, but my parents are very reluctant about it. I state what I'm saying and they actually listen to me, and then we make a compromise instead of it just being their decision or just being my decision. So it's like more equal and it feels a lot better.
Hi, one piece of advice I would give to parents or guardians would be to acknowledge that it's all right to sometimes just allow your child to have their moment of alone time. Like if they come home and they seem upset and they just want to go in their room and they shut their door and they're by themselves. They're there by themselves for a reason. If they wanted to talk to you, they're old enough to, as a teen, they're old enough to come and talk to you when they're ready, and you don't have to feel responsible for going in their room and kind of getting that answer out of them, because sometimes it's important that everyone has their own alone time and moment to think about their thoughts without their parent coming in and asking them all these questions and wanting them to share what happened, because sometimes that like messes with your healing process or something. And it's important for your parent to like not take that personal also, because it's just a normal way for people to react.
Can do for your teen is support them where to support them where they're at, and validate feelings, especially as a queer teen. Not making jokes about pronouns or sexuality in ways you may not understand, because this stuff is complicated, and validate those feelings, because it may save someone's life, especially with the death rates of the suicide rates of LGBTQ children. Just the feeling of being validated and having someone listen can save someone's life. The best things that people have done for me was being put into was having a teacher who listened to some of these feelings, and being able to go and play D&D, and that was the first place that I felt safe around other people my age, and the most comfortable I've ever felt was in that area, because adult would listen. And I've had a lot of great adults in my life who just took the extra mile of listening when I told them that I wanted to use a certain thing or I needed extra help. And those, I owe a lot to those adults in education and my own parents.
One thing that I wish more parents knew about their teens is that every change is a learning process. It doesn't just happen automatically. And they should trust their kid to go through that process and learn from it by themselves.
Oh, I have so much I want to say.
Perfect. Yeah, what I wanted to do is actually turn it back over to each of you for a moment. I'd love to hear, we'll start with you, Dr. Stone. Some things that jumped out at you, what connects back to what you two were both talking about before this? What are our takeaways as parents from all of that?
So I love those kids. So I want to think about the word listen. Most of the time when we are listening and we are emotionally engaged, we are engaged with what I'm going to say next. That is not the same thing as listening. Listening is a skill, and it has to do with being willing to be passive. Listening is one of the ways I build struggle muscles in you, is that I listen to you and I don't solve the problem. And one of the things that I think our kids need to learn is how to listen to themselves. When the young woman said, sometimes I need to be alone, actually what she meant was, sometimes I need to be with me. And that's a space for struggle muscles. Now, in fact, if that kid had a history of suicide attempts, and walked in the house in tears, would I need to be with her? Maybe. And so it's not that there is a right way to do this. And that, of course, is part of what's so hard, is that the right way to do this is fluid, and is situational. But what our kids are saying is, a lot of the time, is I need a sounding board. And we know that adults are really important sounding boards. But a sounding board is not a person who tells you what to do all the time. A sounding board is a person who actually helps you process. And that is a different thing altogether. If I'm helping you process, you are the focus. If I'm telling you what to do, the outcome is the focus. So, and sometimes the outcome should be the focus. But sometimes it's not. And so I think it's important for us to be cognizant and to be aware of which choice we're making. Am I helping you think, or am I telling you I can think for you? And I think that's a really important distinction. And I honestly want kids to learn how to listen to themselves and to process their insides. The first person kid talked about.
Betsy, can I just pause you there for a moment? I want to come back to you with what your next thought is, but what you just said about allowing kids to also sit with themselves, right, and be in touch as well, I think connects to so many things that we are trying to build here at Moving Tradition. So Rabbi Cohen, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that piece. What does that actually look like? And if there was anything else that came up for you. And then Dr. Stone, I promise to come back to you with what you're about to say.
Absolutely. I appreciate you stopping there, because it is a core piece of what we are trying to create more space for, and that we know is missing, especially when teens are spending a lot of time in how to present themselves or have an addictive way to stop their feelings by just zoning out, which we can do too, and scrolling through let's say social media, as opposed to getting to really reflect and get to know oneself. And so that matters to us a lot, and is a piece of what can happen in teen groups or a Kulam group, where there's processing with an adult also there to help make sure it's not just spinning and staying in a negative space. The other thing all right, I'll let you talk, and then I had a thought as a
No,
parent.
you go next, and then I promise I'll come back to it.
So like
I took notes, so I won't forget.
One of the I love them too, and found it very, very powerful and moving. One of the things that I felt as a parent listening to that, like, I want to be I want to be a priority, I want to actually be listened to, is like just aware of how that means that I also need to think as a parent, not just what's my goal for who I want my kids to become in terms of parenting, but what kind of parent do I want to be? And what does that mean about the rest of the decisions I make in my life? Because if I'm so busy and so exhausted at the time that they are just waking up, then it is hard for me to give my full attention, to be patient enough to listen, and not need to jump to a conclusion. And from a tzedek justice place, I don't think our society's set up for that, to give us that kind of space of being that kind of relaxed parent who can just listen. And I want more of that from the Jewish community, from one another, to make the space for that. But I also want me to have to sit with myself and ask some of the questions that you're saying we want to ask about our teens, which is like, what decisions am I making in terms of my values to create that kind of space where I can really.
Right. And so are you living a life which is consistent with what you say you value? Which is a critically important question. And it's a question that I don't think any of us ever finish with. And that's actually a really important thing for us to be aware of. I'm absolutely convinced that the psychological task of our lives is self-knowledge, and that we don't ever get it. That we are constantly saying to ourselves, in one way or another, who am I, and who am I now, and who am I now? And I don't want a final answer on that. I want to be changing and developing and learning new things. I think that our kids think very often that we think we're cooked, that I'm done. And that part of their image of adulthood is that adults know things. Nonsense. And I think it's important for our kids to know that adults also struggle. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my thought, which was one of the kids used the word equal. I think equal is really confusing for kids. There are places where you get to make all the decisions. What flavor of ice cream you want? I don't care. But there are places where adults have to pull the strings and say, okay, that's the end of that. And that part of what makes us reliable is if we are people who they know have limits. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I can't really remember time now in the pandemic, there was an adolescent suicide in my congregation. And one of the things that I did with kids, kids 6th grade and up, this is a very popular kid, was I taught them how to write a condolence note to the parents, and then I told them to write a condolence note to themselves, because I actually think their loss was profound as well. But then I asked them to think of the adult or adults in your life that you can count on at any point that are not your parents. And I said to them, I gave them index cards, and I said to them, write that person's name down, go to them, tell them that they are your go-to people, and write their phone number down. and put it someplace, whether it's in your wallet or next to your bed, put it someplace that you can keep it. And when that person is no longer your go-to person, do this again with somebody else. What I heard back from both parents and kids was that the person that they went to was profoundly honored to be seen in those kids' lives as my go-to person. It could be a relative, whatever. And I also said to the kids, don't think that that person will keep secrets for you. That's not the job of adults. The job of adults is to help you grow up. So sometimes we keep secrets, but lots of times we don't. Go ahead, Alicia.
Yeah, no, I just want to share that I'm hearing like a lot around the important kind of like navigation we have to do as adults, right? To both kind of create some sense of like safety and like security to operate in, knowing who the adults, knowing what the rules are around what they'll do with things when I come to them, but then also making sure that they feel heard and that their voice matters and they have and you know, it's not just, they're not just going to be talked at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Tamara Rabbi Cohen, like I was thinking a little while ago about some of the trainings we do for adults who serve as mentors around how to navigate, you know, that role. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you know, can think about that is helpful information for parents to think about, like, how do I do that? Right.
Yeah. I think it certainly is applicable in some ways. Which is always when a question is asked, one thing is like when a question is asked of you, like, when was the first time you did this? Or did you do that? Hear what the question really is that's being asked, and know that you have a choice there. I think it's even more laden as a parent, because your answer is could cut off some of their answers. And if what they're really looking for is permission, is this okay? Am I normal? Which is so often the question, then validate that and go with that. They're less interested really in the details of your life or your adolescence. And you don't necessarily really want to go there. What they want is, can I talk to you about this? And this is a way to do that. So I think that's something that we go over a lot with group leaders, and is very applicable for parents or family members as well, to be aware of, like, it's a way you use yourself too, and that you can, if there is a story from your own life that you think is really useful, you can tell it as not your story. Like I know someone who had this experience and it made a big impact on me. Stories are good ways of teaching and learning, but it doesn't have to be personalized, and that makes it easier in a certain way to talk it through, when it's not uncomfortable to hear that about your own parents, or to have to think about that. So those are two pieces.
The other thing that's kind of hidden under there, Rabbi, is the idea that lots of times the question that's being asked is actually not the question.
Yeah.
You know, tell me about that question. May actually help get there. Or they may yell at you and say, stop shrinking me. But tell me about that question. I'm curious about why you want to know. Those, I think very often that the question that is delivered to us is a mask for the question that is below it.
Yeah. And I think so many parents I know are just hoping for that question, at least, because they're not even getting the question. So, or they're getting a question like, can I go, can you take me somewhere? But not necessarily the questions that we like want them to ask us about all the things that we wish they would want our wisdom for.
But I think some of that comes back to this lack of critical thinking, and we're not necessarily modeling critical thinking for them. I mean, how do I model critical thinking? I say to you, I'm really struggling about this issue. There's this and there's that, and they don't work together for me. And I want to do the right thing, but I don't want to not do anything. If we say to our kids, if we don't say to our kids, yeah, I have issues too, but we say to our kids, here's something that I'm really wondering about. I think that including the answer to their question. I mean, what if Pam is in the chat room saying, what do you do if your kids asked you, how old were you when you first had sex? I think I could say to a kid, I'm struggling with whether or not that's a useful answer for me to give you. Maybe it'll make you feel better. Maybe it'll make you feel worse. It's really not relevant. I grew up in a different time. But I need to kind of assess what so now I'm actually not answering your question. I'm in critical thinking mode. And so sometimes I think we need to be there.
Yeah.
And I want to point out something Erica said, that can be really useful for us to ask kids if they want us to share stories with them. I think that one of the goals of parenting, one of the short-term goals of parenting, is to share power in ways that are that challenge kids but don't overwhelm them. Share power in ways that challenge kids but don't overwhelm them. So if I can give the decision to you, I'm sharing power. Yes. But there are times when I have to make the decision because that's my job. And so I do think that I think we have to have kind of a vision of free-range children with real boundaries.
Yeah. I want to go back to that, to actually the idea of boundaries, because actually, Rabbi Cohen, early on, you shared the story of sitting around in the backyard with your friend, the parents of your kids' friends, and talked about your different ideas of boundaries. We've talked about the importance of kids having these other adults in their lives in addition to us that they're going to, right? And so someone asked in the chat a little while ago, what happens when our kids' parents have different ideas of what boundaries are okay or not, and how do we best navigate that? So
when our kids' friends' parents, yes.
Yeah, sorry.
So my assumption with that question is that the other set of parents are more lenient. We don't tend to be as distressed when the other set of parents are stricter. But if the other set of parents are more lenient and are saying things like, I want them to be able to learn how to drink, so they should drink at my house, or in the state that I live in, which is also the state that the person asking this question lives in, and I know her, if pot is legal, well, I'm going to smoke pot in front of my kids because it's legal, and why would I not? I think that one of the questions that comes up for us as parents is, am I strict or am I protective? And I think that we, knowing our children, are better at knowing what the limits ought to be. When parents want to be friends with their kids, kids can have lots of friends. They have a very limited number of parents. And so I think it is really important for us to be willing to stay in the parent role. That's what I was kind of thinking about when we talked about the word equal. We're not equal. And if I am to be a resource, just in the same way that teachers are supposed to know more than kids, than students. And if I said to you, if I was your French teacher and I said to you, you know, speak French however you'd like, I wouldn't I wouldn't be a successful French teacher. The idea of the question of how much am I parenting and how much am I friending is, I think, a really essential question. I think we are more reliable if we parent, and we are less reliable if we friend. So do you know your kids are drinking and still say, no, you can't drink, you can't drink in my house? You can't go to that house when I know there's no adult there? I think sometimes our kids are relieved by that. So here's a funny story. When my children were in middle school and high school, we had a deal that anytime they were they had the opportunity to do something that they thought was beyond them socially, that I would ground them. And they would come to me and say, I'm grounded. Now, I literally never grounded my children, but they would come to me and tell me that they wanted to be grounded. And all of their friends thought that I, in particular, not my husband, was an incredibly strict parent. So there's this one day I pick up my daughter, one of my daughters in high school. She gets in the car, she slams the door open and says, I can't believe you grounded me. Okay. And I said to her, yeah, well, then you should watch your mouth. I was really lucky. I thought on a dime. And I said to them all, I will never ask you what it is that you don't want to do. I will always listen. And all of my kids took advantage of being grounded. Mm-hmm. What were they doing? They were asking me to step in and prevent them from being in situations that were over their heads. But because of the way it was structured, they didn't have to act out. I didn't have to figure out that they needed to be grounded. They could tell me. But they also felt powerful. They felt the power of demanding that I behave in a certain way.
Interesting.
I'm going to take this opportunity actually to thank you both. I'm going to hop off and let you both wrap up. Thank you for responding to the input from our teens and our programs and letting me ask you a few questions from folks in the chat. And I'm going to turn it back over to you to have final thoughts.
Thank you, Alicia, and for all you did to make those videos happen. They added so much to the evening. Yeah, Betsy, this has been, I know I'm going to listen to this again because there's so many pearls of wisdom that I'm going to need to listen to and want to listen to again. I'm wondering if there are any final thoughts that you want to share in terms of what you most hope parents will take home from this evening into the next parts of our parenting lives.
So the first thing I would like to say is this is a really tough job. It's a really tough job. And oddly, it doesn't end when they leave home. It's a really tough job. And one of the things that I think I learned recently from my 39-year-old daughter is you don't ever get to stop. That everything I say to her comes through the lens of I am your mother, even when we're playing, that I'm always their mother. I'm always in this role. And even when I wouldn't choose to. The other thing I would say is that the standards that applied in my life do not apply in the lives of my children. Technology is different, social media is different. I would parse those. I think they're actually radically different. The sense of a curated life, and that I'm always comparing my insides to other people's outsides is a real ongoing challenge. We know that there's a woman on the West Coast whose name is Jean Twenge, Twenge. I don't know how to pronounce it. That's the best
That's
I
how we pronounce it too.
Okay. Who did research on self-esteem, particularly amongst adolescent girls, and found that when social media, when smartphones appeared on the planet, girls' self-esteem plummeted. Not so much boys. I think our girls have been more isolated in the pandemic than our boys have. And I think we're seeing that in a much higher increase in anxiety in girls than we've seen in boys. We've seen an increase in anxiety in boys and a higher increase in anxiety.
Yeah, it's like double.
Yeah. And I think that is actually partly because boys have ways of interacting with other boys that girls don't have, primarily video games, which are
we know that more girls are playing video games, but it's almost ubiquitous.
Right. And there's a lot of misogyny in video games.
Yeah.
I think it's really important for us to understand that because I was an adolescent once does not mean I have any idea of what it's like to be an adolescent now, and that you are living with experts and you could listen to them. And they will tell you. And so when they say you don't understand, the best response to you don't understand is teach me. Beautiful. It's not, I do understand.
Beautiful.
So, and this has been a joy for me.
It has been a joy. You brought up gender at the very end there. So I just have to say, it's a core piece of what Moving Traditions does, and the research around what you said about that Jean Twenge points out is also about how one interacts with and is it visual media, and is it passive interaction or active, and so a real piece of what we do with girls particularly is talk about that, and really talk about the research and about their experience, and start to counter it. Yeah, and for anyone here who wants to know more about that, in a moment you're going to see slides to bring you to our website. So thank you for pointing that out. I was thinking about Hanukkah because I'm a rabbi and this is the end of the evening and Hanukkah's coming. And I know a lot of us are familiar with this classic debate about how to light the candles. Between Hillel and Shammai, do we start with, because the miracle grew more every night, do we start with 1, which is what we do, and go to 8, or do we start with 8 and slowly go down, because that's what the oil was, there was less and less. And I was thinking about how connected that is to where we started about parenting from a strengths character, seeing the greatness, the good things about our teens and helping them see it. And noticed how you started by saying validating. It feels good to have validated. Parenting is hard, but I'm going to go on the other side too of the growing the light, and say it's also such a blessing, and we don't have to do it alone. And just to emphasize that piece of connecting with other parents, but also bringing other people into the realm of supporting our teens. And that's really what we at Moving Traditions are all about, supporting you as parents and giving you a break, because there are other adults who are also mentors and sources of support in your teens' lives. And we heard from you tonight that research shows that makes a difference. And it helps us out as parents, and it helps our teens out.
Yep.
So may we spread the light and have the strength to see the strength in our teens and in one another. Thank you all for attending so much. Thank you, Betsy. It's been great to be in conversation with you. In the chat, you're going to see a survey link for giving us some feedback about tonight's webinar. And as a thank you for those who complete the survey, you have the chance to win one of 5 copies of Betsy's book, Refuah Shlema, which she recently published based on various writings during the pandemic. What a gift for yourself, for other parents, for friends during Hanukkah. So take the survey and you can get one of those books. You can also just go ahead and buy one of those books if you go either to Betsy's website or to Amazon, I think.
It's on it. Yes, thank you.
And we are also going to list to share with you our take-home resource page, which we referenced earlier. And you will see this QR code if you are so moved to donate to Moving Traditions. We are grateful for that as well. Thanks again. The recording will be available and sent out tomorrow. And it's been wonderful to spend the evening with you.
Thank you all so much. This has been a joy for me, and I hope it has been helpful and that we've gotten you thinking, because that's the best of all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody. Nice to see all the messages in the chat.
Thank you.
Happy Hanukkah.